Hey everyone, welcome back to the OG Spice Guy Show, where we dig into the real stories behind the world's boldest flavors, from the fields where they're grown to the businesses that bring them to your table. I'm your host, Jonathan Raju. Today, we're in Utah, and we're visiting the folks behind Redmond Real Salt, a family-owned company that has carved out a legendary spot in the natural food world, mining one of the purest ancient seabeds in the world. And the cool part is my family's spice business is partnering with Redmond's to make some great spiced flavored salts. So today I have the honor of sitting down with Darryl Bosshardt, the grandson of Redmond's founder, to talk about how this business came to be. We're going to be talking about the different types of salts. We're going to bust some common salt myths, and then we'll finish up with a little rapid fire salt trivia. So get ready, because this one's going to be both flavorful and fascinating. Rob, normally we're shooting this in LA.
This is awesome, dude.
We're in Utah.
We're in Salt Lake City, Utah, in Heber City. We're at Redmond Salt Warehouse. They have a podcast studio right here for us. So thanks to Darryl, thanks to Q for bringing all the equipment in and kind of helping us get this all set up.
This has been fun, a little nerve-wracking, a little different. We're not in our studio.
Yeah, but we got to go with the flow. And I'm really excited to hear all about salt. You know I'm a saltaholic.
Yes, you are a saltaholic.
Yeah, so Darryl, it's a pleasure to meet you, and thanks for bringing us in.
It's a delight to be here. For years, Jonathan, we've kind of talked about doing something like this. I think we first probably met each other around 2005.
Yeah, sounds about right.
It's been 20 years in the making, and it's been fun to see the relationship over the years, and excited to finally get a chance to sit down with you and talk a little bit about high quality organics and Redmond and that relationship, and a little bit about the history of salt.
Yeah, I love what we do because HQO is a family owned and operated business, as is Redmond's, and just the opportunity to partner with people that you like doing business with. So Darryl, I want to start with the Redmond story. So your grandfather, do I have that correct? He started the business?
Yeah, so my grandpa, his name was Milo, and his brother was Lamar.
Okay.
And in World War II, each of them had jobs that actually lend themselves to fast forward to the salt company that we have today. In World War II, my grandpa was a riveter for McDonnell Douglas, or Douglas Aircraft, in California.
Okay.
And his brother was working as a miner at Kennecott, which is the big copper mine here in Utah. After the war, the two of them wanted to come back and raise their kids near each other on the family farm in central Utah. And so they moved back, and they were farming in the late 40s. And then in the 1950s, around the later part of the 1950s, there was a drought here in Utah, which pretty much wiped out the farm. And they knew there was an outcropping of salt just north and south of their farm that the Native Americans had harvested long before the early pioneers had came through the valley.
Okay.
And so they figured, the farm's not doing that well. Let's take out a loan and go into the salt business, which was a pretty scary thing to do back then.
Yeah.
But it turned out to be a great decision. And now the company has grown far beyond two brothers. Now there's about 800 team members at Redmond. Wow. And we've expanded far beyond just salt into a lot of seasoning salts that we partner with you guys on, as well as other natural products and natural foods, and even some other non-food industries.
How did the originators of the business, you had mentioned that they knew that there was, these salt deposits. How did they know that?
So animals love salt. In fact, all civilizations started around access to the salt deposits, because salt has always been such a key part of humanity.
Okay.
And the term salary is actually based on getting paid a wage in salt.
Ah.
And the term "is a man worth his salt" was because you were getting paid in salt. And if you weren't working hard enough, you weren't worth the salt that you were getting paid. And so civilizations have always needed salt, because animals need salt, humans need salt. I know you have a little bit of a biology background.
Yep.
And outside of a spiritual discussion, we're just water and salt. That's really all that we are. And so by watching animals, you can find salt deposits. And salt today comes from either a current ocean, like the San Francisco Bay or the Gulf of Mexico. It comes from a dead sea, like the Dead Sea in Israel or the Dead Sea here in Utah, called the Great Salt Lake. Or it comes from an ancient seabed. And animals will always find that. So early man would just watch the animals. They would find the salt, and then they could then create a deposit or an extraction process around this salt. And that's how the early population of Utah found this salt, was watching the animals.
Okay. So farming, machinery, so they have the makings to be able to start a mine.
Yes. Yep. Okay. And that's how it started. Initially selling salt just to other local farmers, because all animals need salt. So they would, get a pick and a shovel and break off some salt and sell it to the local farmer to feed his cows. And then early on sold a lot of that salt for roads here in Utah, and in a lot of mountain areas that get snow, salt is a great melter.
Yep.
And so we would sell salt early on for livestock as well as for roads. And then in the 1970s, the health food movement in the U.S. really started to gain ground. And there was a nutritionist from California, actually, that came to Utah to get a tour of the Grand Canyon and probably Moab and the state parks. And as part of that tour, he came by Redmond and got a tour. We didn't think much of it. Well, fast forward a few months, and we started getting calls from California health food stores saying, hey, I'd like to buy your salt to put on my health food shelf. And we said, well, we don't really sell it for that. We sell it for cows or for roads. And they said, this nutritionist said that the salt coming out of this deposit in Utah is not only the healthiest and tastiest, but it has this beautiful mineral profile that we would like to have in our health food store. And so my dad and his brother sat around and said, what do we call this? It's salt from Redmond, and it's not processed salt. It's not new salt, half salt. It's just real salt. And the brand was born.
So Redmond's is the location, or the...
Yeah, my grandfather's brother didn't want it named after themselves. They wanted it to be something a lot bigger than them.
Okay.
And behind the town that this salt occurs in, the name of the town is Red Mound or Redmond, because there's 3 red mounds behind the town.
Okay.
And so it's named Redmond Salt after the town of Redmond, because they didn't want it to be attached to their name.
So is there a difference in qualities or purities of salt? So I know you had also mentioned salt for the roadways. I'd always assumed that salt was, maybe a lesser or lower salt, as opposed to ones that would be for livestock or for human consumption.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it probably not unsimilar to plants. So in salt, we default to what we call the food codex. And the food codex defines what food salt is.
Okay.
And food salt is 97% sodium chloride. It can have certain additives added in, things like anti-caking agents that some companies do, and it can have certain different contamination levels of different things. Here on the table, for those that are watching this, you can see a salt crystal, and you can see different color variation. And in the deposit, we'll see crystals that are like this, but we'll also see some when you go down tomorrow that are much darker, and that darker would be used more for the industrial product line. This piece here, if we were to analyze this, is probably going to be 98, maybe 98.5% NaCl, with about 2% trace minerals: potassium, calcium, magnesium, selenium, copper, phosphorus, iodine, zinc. If we were to take just that tip, that might be maybe 97%. And then in the deposit, we'll see all the way down to like 92, 94%.
Okay.
And so those different areas we'll use for different products.
Your grandfather owned the land. He also owned the mineral rights. Is that how it works?
Fortunately, back then, yes.
Okay.
Today you can sell a piece of property and the water under your property may not be yours. Yes. And you might not even know that.
Yes.
And you buy this piece of property thinking you have water, and it turns out the guy 3 guys before sold the water out from underneath you.
Right.
And minerals can be that way. So now you might own a piece of property and don't own any of the minerals under you. Fortunately, back then, property and mineral rights went hand in hand.
Okay.
And so because they had this property, they also had the mineral rights that went with the property.
Interesting.
Yeah. And whether it was luck or serendipity or good fortune or divine intervention, you can pick, but it's been really fortuitous. And my grandpa and his brother both felt like there was a stewardship that they had for these minerals to help bless as many lives as possible through employment as well as through the benefit of the minerals. I think your father probably felt the same with the stewardship for the herbs and spices that he had the ability to bless and impact lives with.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. We kind of share a similar background in that it was my father that was born and raised on an organic farm in southern India. So his father was an organic farmer before him, and his father before him was an organic farmer as well. And I always say at that time, there was no difference, organic or conventional. It was just food, and so very similar to Redmond's, it was real food. So no additives, preservatives, no pesticides, insecticides, fertilizers, things like that.
When it comes to produce and herbs, there's probably a lot of things that that can go right and that can go wrong.
Yep.
With salt, there's really just two things.
Yep.
There's an old saying about salt losing its savor. In salt, the only things that can really go wrong is either contamination or changing it. The bigger challenge with salt is hygroscopic, which means it sucks water out of the air. Here in dry Utah, it doesn't make much difference. But if this salt crystal were sitting on a table in Hawaii or in southern Florida on a humid day, it's going to get really wet as it sucks water out of the air. Now, salt's job in the body is to regulate intracellular and extracellular fluids through the sodium-potassium pump. And salt companies years ago noticed that salt gets really sticky in the shaker because salt is sucking water out of the air. Our grandmother knew that and would put rice in the shaker to help stop, just like you'd put your cell phone in a bag of rice when it gets wet. Unfortunately, these salt manufacturers got together and said, what chemicals could we coat this crystal with to stop its ability to interact with moisture? And there's a whole list of chemicals: sodium silicoaluminate, things like yellow precipitative soda, which is sodium ferrocyanide. And these chemicals will stop the salt's ability to absorb moisture. So the salt will pour out of the shaker when it's raining outside. Some of your older listeners might remember the old saying, when it rains, it pours, and it has a little girl with an umbrella and the salt's pouring out of the shaker. That's because of the chemicals that are coating the crystal to stop its ability to interact with moisture. So that's the real two problems with salt. Salt today, either it's demineralized because the salt company's pulling out the potassium or the calcium or the magnesium, which our bodies need trace amounts of, and even more than trace amounts of, some of those. But more importantly, a lot of salt today, if you look at the label at your grocery store, even at your natural food store, you might see a list of ingredients that are added to stop the salt's ability to interact with moisture when that's salt's job in the body. And so I tell people there's three things to ask when they're looking for a good salt or a good herb or spice. First, know who's producing it. Because if you know who's producing it, you can find out the next two questions, which is, what's the source? Is it coming from an organic farm in India? Is it coming from next to an oil refinery? And the third question is, what are they doing to it? Are they taking anything out? And are they putting anything in? And I think those three questions would give you an amazing spice company to work with or a great salt company to work with, whether it's high quality organics or it's Redmond. There's a lot of other great products out there. But I think if you ask those three questions, you can meet Jonathan and ask, hey, where is this turmeric coming from? What are you doing to it? Are you taking anything out or putting anything in? And you might pick high quality organics or you might pick another brand. But if you ask those questions, you're going to be getting a great product.
Absolutely.
Can I jump in here and ask a question really quick? Salt, for years, we all grew up like it's bad for you, right? It gives you high blood pressure. Well, I would guess that the news of the last few years has been great for all salt companies, let alone Redmond's. Right?
Yeah, it's funny, that idea that salt's bad, fat went through the same thing. For years, we heard that all fat was bad for us, and then we realized it wasn't. The reason that we have come to associate that was this study back in the 1950s, because if we went back 100 years ago or even 1,000 years ago, we would have eaten more salt because everything we ate outside of season would have had to have been preserved in salt, because we didn't have freezers or refrigerators or all these preservatives we have today. So all of the meats, the kimchis, the sauerkrauts, the fermented veggies, all of that would have been preserved with salt. But yet in the 1950s, because there is an association with water retention and salt consumption, because salt does push fluids into the body, there was a scientist, or a couple of them in the 1950s, that said, hey, I wonder if we take salt and inject 20 times the safe amount of salt into a rat, let's see what happens. And sure enough, if you inject a mouse with 20 times its safe amount of salt, it has water retention and blood pressure issues, especially if you restrict water consumption. In nature, animals don't overdose on salt. They'll eat salt and they go and drink water. And we humans sometimes forget to drink water because we don't want to pee at night, or we're too busy, and so we get extra thirsty. Animals are smarter than we are. Yeah. But in nature, you don't overdose on oranges, you don't overdose on carrots, and you don't overdose on salt unless it's very intentional. Yep. With the caveat that a lot of our food today, if you can even define it that way, they use copious amounts of salt as a preservative. And they're using this processed, refined, highly additive chemical salt on foods that you shouldn't eat anyway. And if your diet consists of just these processed foods with just processed salt, you're going to have some water retention, some blood pressure, some insulin resistance. It's not the salt that's doing that. It's the poor food choices, the lack of water, and the poor salt putting on the poor food. And that's what they've discovered today, the same with fats.
Agreed. I mean, I've heard this, and so that's great. Thank you for the insight right from the guy that cuts the salt out of the ground. But when I eat, I might do 20 times the salt intake for a human. Like I just, people put salt on a lot of different things that you wouldn't think.
And salt, if you're eating natural salt in the natural diet, you'd have a tough time overdosing on it. Our ancestors never overdosed on salt, even though they used it for everything. And so adding salt to your water or adding salt to fruit, if you've ever had, a slice of watermelon. In fact, we have a product, we call it Relight, which is an electrolyte drink mix. And I use it like that. It's Fun Dip. Remember Fun Dip as a kid? Yeah. And so at my house, we'll have sliced apples, and we'll dip apples in Relight, and which is our electrolyte drink mix. And it's almost like that Fun Dip as a kid, but a way healthier version. And you don't overdose on salt if you're not eating it in all of those processed foods.
Very cool. Very cool. So, of course, I feel really smart when I tell people that salt is not a spice.
Yes.
Because my good friend Jonathan has told me that it is a mineral, not a spice.
Correct.
Right? Pat on my back.
Yeah.
So I just want to get that out there.
Let's pivot a little bit and talk about the actual product of salt. There's many different salts out there. I think a lot of people just commonly refer to it as salt. So can we talk about the different types of salt and the role that it plays?
I love that question. And sometimes, if we were to ask an audience and say, hey, who has heard sea salt is better? Yeah. Probably most people would raise their hand and say that.
Or Himalayan salt.
Yeah, there's a lot of these salt names. Now, all of salt is coming from a seabed at some point. Okay. It's either a current ocean, a dead sea, or an ancient seabed.
So a dead sea means it was once a sea, but it's completely evaporated.
Yeah, or cut off. And so it might be like the Dead Sea in Israel, which is a super saturated body of salt water. Or the Great Salt Lake here in Utah is a super saturated, cut off seabed. Okay. And this salt, whether it's the Himalayan salt from Nepal and Pakistan area, or the Bolivian pink salt, similar, or the Redmond salt here in Utah, that's all from an ancient seabed, meaning a seabed that existed eons ago. Geologists, of course, I wasn't alive back then, but they say in the 150 million year old seabed, according to geologic time frame. And the seabed in this case was the Arctic Ocean that flooded down through Canada and left this massive body of salt water. This original sea was called the Sundance Sea. It was cut off and then buried under volcanic activity. And then Utah was 50 miles wider apart. If you drive down to Redmond tomorrow, you'll notice that Utah has a lot of north and south mountain ranges. They call them the Ochres and the Henrys and the Wasatch. Because what happens, this seabed, now ancient seabed covered in, ash and volcanic activity, as Utah is compressed, this seabed is pushed up. Okay. So one of the things you'll see, the strata in the mine runs vertical, which is extremely unique because you would expect a sedimentary deposit to be horizontal. Okay. And so one of the things that makes this deposit unique and so safe is that it's pushed up. And this deposit here in Utah, it's about half a mile wide, 3 miles long, and 5,000 feet deep. Wow. And it's just been pushed together. Wow. And so these seabeds, either a current ocean, dead sea, or ancient seabed, all of those can be sources of salt. Okay. So if we were off the coast of Brittany, France, we could take the ocean water, which is about 3%, which is why it stings our eyes, because our bodies are 1.9% actually, not 1, but it's 0.9. And we can take that water that's 3% and evaporate all the water off, and we would end up with a salt crystal left over because our oceans have about 3% salt in them. Okay. Or we can take crystals like this. So all salt can be defined as sea salt. Just where is it coming from?
I see.
Now, the science of salt's a little bit different because the size of the crystal actually really makes a difference when it comes to flavor.
Yep.
And so probably similar to some spices.
100%. We were just doing a spice blend literally last week where it's larger, cut sizes, larger particle sizes. And it's one of our top selling blends. And we were working with a popcorn company. And they said, hey, can we do this blend? It has a lot of different herbs and spices and very vegetal notes. And we want to put it on our popcorn. But because the granulation's so large, it won't adhere to our popcorn. So we ground it into like a 50 or a 60 mesh, and we tasted it, and it was not good. And we were shocked. But we knew this, right? Our R&D team knew that different size particles will hit your palate differently.
And with salt, you'll really notice it because if you put this, if we took a size crystal like a peppercorn and you put that in your mouth, you're only touching the outside surface area of that crystal. So it's like if you took a Jolly Rancher or a piece of hardtack and you put it in your mouth, even though that might weigh 6 grams, you're only tasting the outside surface area.
Okay.
If you took that candy and then pulverize it into powder and put that same volume in your mouth, now you've just exponentially exposed your tongue to surface area that was previously trapped inside that crystal. So with salt, there's 4 primary sizes. There's the coarse size, which is about the size of a peppercorn. Okay. And when you grind salt, you don't get any benefit like you do when you grind a peppercorn.
Right. You release the volatile oils.
In salt, it doesn't work like that.
Right.
But it can be fun to put on the bottom of maybe a meal, or you could, for display, or you can put it in a grinder because you can grind different sizes. The next size when it comes to salt is one of the more confusing ones because the next size, we call that kosher sized. Oh. And kosher, there's actually 2 meanings of kosher. If any listeners are Jewish or have Jewish ancestry, the Jewish population has a health code called kosher. And it comes from the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And there are certain foods that aren't clean according to the Bible. And so a rabbi will come to a facility and doesn't offer any type of sacrament or blessing, just make sure people are washing their hands and they're following the Jewish law of health. That gives you the little circle OU that you're probably familiar with. When you're talking salt, though, if you ever see kosher in the name, it's actually the size of the crystal they're talking about.
Oh, I never knew that.
And that is cool to know.
That is fascinating.
That is the fun fact of the day.
Yes.
So kosher is just the size of the...
Right, because, and this is the cool part, so in Judaism, blood is not kosher. Okay. You can't eat blood. And if you want a piece of steak, you have to get the blood out of that steak before you can eat it. And because salt is hygroscopic, a larger salt flake will suck the blood out of meat faster than a finer salt flake without making the meat overly salty. So this size of crystal is known as koshering salt because it sucks blood out of meat more efficiently than a different size crystal.
So it's a verb.
It's a verb.
It's a verb.
And that size of crystal, because of the way it dissolves on your tongue, works really well for something like edamame or a margarita rimmer or a prime rib crust. And so almost every time a chef on TV or a recipe calls for kosher salt, unless you're watching a Jewish cooking show, they're talking about a size of crystal because of the chemistry that'll take place when it's applied. You would never put a super fine salt on a pretzel, or it would be like your popcorn example. And that would be so salty, it would be nasty. But you would use a kosher-sized crystal on a pretzel or on a margarita rimmer or on edamame. And then the next size would be fine, which is your traditional table salt size. And then we also have a popcorn sized salt. We call it powder.
Yep.
Because it adheres to popcorn or sprouted nuts or sprouted seeds very well. Yep. But you would use a fraction of it. Otherwise,
it's going to perceive as way more salty.
Exactly.
Yeah. Today we had lunch in here in Heber City, and right there on the table was Redmond's Real Salt. So
yeah, baby, I've consumed quite a bit today already.
And the size makes a big difference on the flavor.
Difference. Yeah. So koshering is referred to the size, and so I watch a lot of cooking shows as I'm a foodie, and I never knew that. I never knew that kosher. I had just assumed that it was blessed by the rabbi, and
so we actually have a joke here. We call this kosher squared.
Okay.
Because this salt is kosher certified
yeah.
and it's kosher sized.
Yeah.
Where the blue lid would be fine sized. That's certified kosher.
Yes. Yeah, we're familiar with the kosher, certification. All of our ingredients are not only organic but kosher certified as well. So I want to talk about some different types of salt. So a couple of years ago, I know at least for our business, certainly the demand for Himalayan sea salt was through the roof. Malden sea salt is very popular. Anybody with an Instagram or TikTok account is talking about it. So you had said earlier that all salt, is originating from a deposit or an ancient seabed. So can you help me understand, what's the difference between a Himalayan and a Malden?
So geologically, Redmond salt, Himalayan salt, the Bolivian pink salt, they're all the same. They're all from an ancient seabed that occur in a crystal form like this. The difference with a Malden salt, they're really known as a really light flake salt. So when you have seawater, it's 3% sodium chloride. And when you have max salinity, so if we had a bucket of salt water here that we got from the ocean, it's at 3%. When the water hits 26%, that's max salinity. And so the salt will start to fall out of suspension. If the salt falls to the bottom, you'll get chunkier crystals. This is like the French gray that you might see, kind of a chunky, damp salt. There's a lighter flake that occurs at the top of that solution. If you scrape or lift those flakes off, you'll get a very delicate salt flake. Excellent for things like a salt caramel, or you might have a steak and you can sprinkle and put that on. And that's where Malden really shines, is a really light, delicate flake. If you're putting it in soup or you're putting it in some baking, that magic's gone because it dissolves so quickly. But that larger flake dissolves differently on the tongue. Yep. So in fact, we've actually got our Redmond version of a Malden salt in the works.
Okay.
It's still about a month to 6 months out. We have got some brine, which is super saturated salt water that collects in the mine from underground springs that trickle. Okay. And so we are taking this deep mine brine and then evaporating it in a pan and making a Redmond version of a flake salt.
Oh, interesting.
And that's in the works.
So it's all the same, from a kosher salt to a Himalayan salt to a Malden salt, all the same.
It's all the same structure. Okay. It's just the nature of the crystal.
Okay.
So... And maybe a little bit different in the spice world, maybe cinnamon. You have cinnamon bark or you have cinnamon leaf, right? Yep. And each one of those, they're both cinnamon, but they taste different.
Sure.
And so salt is the same. If you have a salt from an ancient seabed, that seabed is going to have some unique structure versus if you get salt from maybe the Murray River in Australia, it has a pink algae. And so it's going to be... So in salt, almost like wine, there can be a lot of subtle differences based on the location and based on the process. Even though the salt itself is very similar, there can be some uniqueness. And so even though I'm a huge fan of our product, truth be told, I have some Malden salt. I have some Cabernet salt. I've got some Peruvian black salt. Because it is fun, almost like a wine tasting. You have salt from around the world.
You're a salt connoisseur, so
is it sommelier? Sommelier.
Yeah. So Darryl, one of the questions I get asked the most often is, do we carry here at High Quality Organics? Do we carry organic salt? So you and I, obviously, we're in the biz and we're kind of looking at each other, chuckling. Help our listeners understand. First question is there such thing as organic salt?
There is no such thing as organic salt.
Okay.
For something to be defined as organic, it has to be once living or carbon-based. And salt is neither of those things. Salt was never alive, so it can't be organic. So that creates a challenge because if we have an organic garlic salt that you help us with, we want to be able to say that's USDA organic garlic salt. Fortunately, when it comes to salt, there's a certification or a classification called OMRI, which is the Organic Materials Review Institute. And OMRI and other organizations like them will certify a non-organic ingredient as an organic ingredient. So we can take salt, which cannot be organic because it was never living and it's not carbon. But when we add it to an organic ingredient, like organic freeze-dried garlic, then it can still be defined as organic, even though most of it is still a non-organic product.
Yeah, so that's how you guys are able to label, your seasoned salts as organic.
Yeah, because we'll take organic freeze-dried spice and then we will mix it with salt, which is a certified organic ingredient, even though it's not organic.
It's not organic. Okay. I think we've talked a lot about salt, and we have some rapid fire salt trivia. So I was just going to fire away, and maybe we go you against Rob.
Sounds good.
Oh dear.
Yes. And we'll see how it goes. So the first one's easy. Is salt a spice?
No.
Okay, that was too easy.
Although we have loose definitions sometimes of spice.
All right.
You traveled a lot on the spice trail.
Yes.
But it is technically a mineral,
Yes.
not a spice.
Not a spice. Let's have Darryl answer this one. Does salt raise blood pressure?
Oh, now that is interesting. At super high amounts in some individuals, yes, it can have an impact, but it's not the impact that most people think. And in fact, salt is also used to lower blood pressure.
Really? How so?
Because it balances the body's solution. Okay. And so if you enter the hospital, even if you have high blood pressure, you will still get a sodium and chloride IV because it will help regulate the body fluids.
Dr. Clyde over here would also like to say, I don't know what the science is, but I would say that right now, what I'm hearing in podcasts and health and men's health is that there was an exaggeration to the connection of sodium and or salt and high blood pressure. It was a little bit inflated, and so it doesn't equal a 1-to-1. So
a similar question is fat bad for me?
Right.
And it's really hard. Years ago, we would have all said yes, absolutely. Right. And now we say, you need a more context.
That's right.
And with salt, it's the same way. Can salt raise blood pressure? Yes. Can salt have an impact on heart? Yes. Is it always a negative impact? No.
And what I heard today is, do companies put stuff in their salt that makes it less healthy than real salt?
Yes. So I have another question. You were talking about your Relight line, electrolytes. So I'm seeing a lot of videos talking about, hey, first thing in the morning when you wake up, you're in a fasted state. Put a pinch of kosher salt and a squeeze of lemon juice and 8 ounces of water. So I assume that Relight is a similar product, electrolytes. Can you talk briefly on electrolytes and how adding salt to a water helps our bodies?
Yeah, I've got a little display I show sometimes that has a dish with distilled water in it with a wire coming in and out of that dish. Okay. And if you plug that wire in, the light bulb will not turn on because distilled water is a very poor conductor of electricity. Okay. And our bodies are, outside of a spiritual discussion, we're just water, salt, and electricity. Okay. And so we have to be able to conduct electricity. If you've ever noticed, our tears are salt, our sweat is salt, our urine is salt. And so when we wake up in the morning, our bodies have been detoxing itself all night, and we'll wake up in a dehydrated state. And so we could go to the hospital, and there's all these mobile clinics now that they'll do a mobile IV when you're feeling bad because you're not hydrated. Yeah. And you could pay, $300, $400, $500 for a mobile IV, or you could just make yourself an IV with a glass of good, clean water, a pinch of salt, and you're off to the races.
My wife is a nurse, and so she says 9 times out of 10 when you're not feeling well, drink some water. She calls it instant patient, just add water. You'll feel better. So the kid's saying, Mom, I don't feel well. Mom, I have a headache. Mom, my muscles hurt, something. She says, are you hydrated? Have you drank water today? 9 times out of 10, the answer is no.
Our bodies are 72% water. And so if I'm 150 pounds, I'm really 108 pounds of water and 42 pounds of mineral. And so when those water levels drop, we start to feel really crappy. And in fact, you can die from low salt. It's called hyponatremia. Yep. And so if you're sweating and you're crying and you're using the bathroom, you are losing salt every day, all of the time. Yep. And so the first sign of salt loss is usually irritability or a headache, and then we'll start getting muscle fatigue and cloudy thoughts. Yeah. And all of those, to your wife's point, a big glass of water should be the first thing we reach for versus some of the headache medicines that we might think about first.
Yeah. Okay. This one's for Rob. Does salt enhance flavor?
Yes. It does. I don't know how it does. So I would say I wonder if sometimes it is enhancing the flavor, or it's just the taste of the salt and how it acts on my tongue as well. I don't know.
Both. In fact, because salt is such an important nutrient, our bodies crave salt. In fact, oftentimes today when people think they're craving sugar, what they're really craving is salt. And if you were to feel like you've got a sugar craving and you had a dish of salt like this, and you put a salt crystal under your tongue, it's going to taste sweet. Because right now, because we've been visiting for 30, 40 minutes, we're probably both a little dehydrated and both low on salt. Yeah. And so when you put salt in your mouth, it activates the saliva and it tells the body, hey, other things are coming. And salt is a big part of nutrition and digestion. In fact, if you think about the way we digest food, it's with hydrochloric acid. We don't eat hydrochloric acid. Right. So chloride is actually this forgotten nutrient that is essential, but we never really talk about the importance of chloride because it just kind of comes as a piggyback to sodium. But when you think about our digestion, we need chloride and we need salt. And so that's why when you add it to food, it really brings out this flavor because we crave it so much. Just like that first glass of water after a marathon or a long run or a hot day in the garden or roofing tastes so great, but the fifth glass doesn't taste so great because our bodies are really smart. And the same thing when it comes to salt. That first little bit of salt tastes really good, and as our levels start to increase, we start to crave less. If we really get back to listening to how our bodies are trying to communicate to us.
I think this one's a good one for Rob. Which ancient empire is said to have paid its soldiers with salt?
You said it earlier, I wasn't paying attention. Egypt?
Rome.
All right. Speaking of how much salt, and salt as a monetary thing, how much salt is out there? I mean, how long, you guys are we're going to go to the salt mines tomorrow, right? I'm really excited about it. We're going to see it. They're going to blast them. We're going to see it. I mean, how long is this business going to last?
So the deposit itself, geologists have estimated that we've probably got about 900 years worth of production left. So we've got a few more than we're all.
A couple more grandkids will be running the show. Exactly. 900 years of salt. How many pounds of salt do you mine a day?
Probably in the 60,000 tons a week. And of that amount, like 60 becomes food salt. So it's a really small percentage.
I see. It just seems to never run. I mean, we have so much of it. And yes, the ocean. So you can collect it out of the ocean too. You guys, it's a sedimentary.
Yeah. So, if you look at the history of salt back in the times of Rome, when it was actually paid as a salary or as a wage, salt was much harder to come by because of the shipping. If you lived on the coast, you could go out and get a bucket of seawater and then evaporate it and you would make salt. But then the further you get from the coast, the more expensive that is. And if you're the Roman Empire and you have soldiers that are marching all across that whole empire, not only do the horses need salt, all of the livestock needs salt, and all the soldiers need salt, not counting using salt to preserve all of the food for the entire legion. And so that's why salt historically was so valuable, is because you could trade it ounce for ounce with gold because you can't eat gold. You can't preserve your food with gold. Unfortunately, it's not the case anymore. Yeah. It's pretty cheap.
Well, Darryl, I've truly appreciated your time and the conversation today. I was very excited coming here. I knew I was going to learn a lot about salt. I didn't know we were going to learn this much about salt, and I think more importantly about your family business and really the legacy that has been passed on. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. So thank you so much for your time today.
Jonathan, it's been a real pleasure. Hopefully we can do it again.
What an incredible story. From an ancient seabed in Utah to kitchen tables across the country, the Redmonds family has shown what it means to build something with integrity, patience, and purpose. Salt may be simple, but hearing how it connects history, health, and craftsmanship reminds me why I started this podcast in the first place. Real ingredients, real people, real stories. If you've enjoyed today's episode, make sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts and share it with someone who appreciates a good origin story and a well-seasoned meal. I'm Jonathan Raju, and until next time, stay curious, stay flavorful, and stay salty, but only in the kitchen.
The OG Spice Guy Show is produced by Galaxy Media in Los Angeles, California, in association with High Quality Organics, the nation's leading provider of organic ingredients. Executive producers are Jonathan Raju and Rob Clyde. Today's episode was produced by Rob Clyde and Max Flora, edited by Drew Unser, graphics by Michelle Esteva, web and SEO by Rebecca McDonald, and social media services by Noelle Mercer and Sophia Sherman. The producers would like to thank the entire team at Redmond Real Salt, including Darryl Bosshardt, Trevor Westrup, Tanner Whitworth, and McQuaid Rhodes, for hosting the show in their Salt Lake City headquarters and showing us a great time in the salt mines. You can DM and like, follow, or subscribe to us on all platforms and socials at OG Spice Guy.